As I was saying, we don't have a lot of Gemara to cover tonight because we're already halfway down 15b, Tesvav Amid Beis. So, of course, we're going to not suffice with just making it onto Tezayim and Aleph. We're going to go about a quarter way down, or nearly somewhere between a quarter way, halfway down, just so we have a respectable amount of material tonight, which, of course, makes it easier next week because then we've already sunk our teeth well into the Amud. And there's also a short Tosos that we'll do. I say short, meaning two sentences, that's 2 lines. So don't get scared. It's not that massive one at Tesvav and Beis that started on Tesvav and Aleph that we're going to do. I am likewise intimidated. And okay, so let's get to it. Tesvav and Beis, 15b in the middle where the 2 dots are. So this is, of course, I remember I got tested on when I was in high school, what does it mean when you see these 2 dots over here? And we're like, it's a colon. So it's referring back to the Mishnah. It's a quotation from the Mishnah. So the Mishnah told us that someone who covers their sukkah with either metal poles, which we dealt with previously, or with, what was the next one? Aruchos hamita. So what are these aruchos hamita? So it would seem that they are parts of the bedpost or parts of the bed that you want to use. You want to take the beds were made out of wood. Wood is inherently a kosher material, but the other psul that would disqualify them from being schach, that they are a kli. They are part of something that could be makabel tuma, that's susceptible to tuma. So let's take a look at the Gemara. Ami Bartav Yumi, that someone uses worn out clothing. Now, not hearing me? No?
Now it's okay.
Okay, you know what? I
gotta keep looking forward.
Under my laptop. I think that's muffling the microphone. How's that? Better?
Good.
Okay, should I start over the Gemara again? Did you not hear from the beginning?
No, we heard.
Yeah, okay, good. Okay. Oh, Judd, how are you doing over there? You're muted. Now you're the one who's
It was when you were turning to the side.
Oh, okay. I'll try to
Just for me.
keep myself over here.
I know it's hard to do.
All right. Very good. So, okay. So this line, the Mishnah supports Rav Ami Bartav Yumi's statement that someone who uses worn out bivloi kelim, worn out clothing we're talking about, it is possible for skach. Now, what's the issue? Well, clothing are a form of kelim. They're susceptible to tuma. But as the Gemara will talk about later on, I would think, so basically, there's a shear. If you look at Rashi, it already tells us what we'll see in the Gemara, that there's a shear of shalosh al shalosh, of 3 fingers breadth by 3 fingers breadth of material that makes something mekabel tuma. This is actually relevant halacha. Now, how often are we? It's interesting because we don't have a Beis Hamikdash nowadays, except for maybe when Kohanim are going to the cemetery. We don't deal with the issue of tuma directly. But what's fascinating in halacha is that we kind of have the it sounds like a negative connotation. I don't mean it that way. We deal with like the fallout of tuma tahara. We deal with the byproducts of it. What do I mean? So in Hilchos Sukkah, you can't use schach that's makabel tuma. So we're not really dealing with tuma tahara here. We're just worried. It's just incidentally that's something you can't use. And then the second, I'll give another example. It's relevant to this when it comes to Hilchos Nida for women. So it's important that when a woman sees blood on a surface that is not makabel tuma, well, she does not become a nida then. So that's why if blood is seen on a toilet seat, well, the toilet is connected to the ground, and ground cannot become tameh. Also, that's the discussion as well when it comes to things like the pad or the toilet paper. So the question is, if it doesn't have the dimensions like we're talking about here in the Gemara, if it's here in the Gemara it's talking about where it started with enough fabric that it's big enough to be makabel tuma. But many of the women's hygienic products that are used are so small that it's possible that they're not makabel tuma to begin with, depending on their measurements. So that's just another example. Sukkah, Nida. In Hilchos Nida, by the way, that's a funny thing. when you learn the Masechta of Nida, so people think that the whole Masechta is going to be full of a discussion about the intricacies of Nida as we know it nowadays. But there's really two main consequences, results of a woman becoming a Nida. One is as we know it nowadays, which has to do with intimacy with her husband. But the second one, which is completely lost on us, which actually occupies a huge chunk of the earlier literature, is she becomes Tameh. So all the different laws of Tumah Tahara we don't really talk about nowadays. And if you permit me one more thing, so if Moshe Feinstein was asked, and so officially on the books, a husband is not supposed to pass something to his wife when she's a nida. It's just another gather. So Moshe has a tshuva in which he was asked about a man and woman, a husband and wife. They're at a Shabbos table, I believe, and she is embarrassed to instead of handing her husband the tray directly, she puts it in front of him and then he picks it up, and she's embarrassed because she thinks people are going to be looking closely and knows that she's a nida. So Moshe Feinstein says, he says, big deal. Back in the day, in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, women had to wear special clothing called that were big day nida that they wore when they were a nida. Women walked around and it said like clearly on what they were wearing that they were a nida because people had to know, and she had to wear those clothing when she was a nida because that's what became tameh. So it's kind of funny. I mean, the Ramah says, of course, that women go to the mikvah, they should do it discreetly, but it's really funny what it's become, because something that used to be more of a public Tumah Tahara matter that was not, what do you call it, not taboo. Once we lost the Tumah Tahara ramifications, it became a more taboo thing over time. Anyway, I bring this all up to say, because we're talking about the Tumah of clothing, and that's very important to help us nida. So we're learning about Tumah Tahara as a byproduct of our studies here. Okay. So, so just like elsewhere, which we will see momentarily in the Gemara, in which it was ruled that when you have the long board or the short board of the bed, and it has still 2 feet of the bed attached to it, that is still considerable enough that it can still be Makabel Tumah. And the Gemara will tell us shortly, because it can be attached to, actually, I'm not going to tell you, the Gemara is literally just about to tell us this. So, okay. So where did he give this ruling that we just learned? Sahaditznan mita mitamas chavil mitaharis chavil de Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer is of the opinion that a bed could only be susceptible to tuma when it is fully intact, and likewise, it could only become purified when it is fully intact. But the Chachamim say, no, even when the bed is not fully assembled or is partially disassembled, it could still be susceptible to tuma, and likewise, it is also available to be purified at the same time. So, my nihu, what do we mean? Like, to what degree is the bed disassembled, but is still considered susceptible to tumah at the same time? So, Rabbi arucha ushte kraim kitzar shtei kraim. This is the halacha we referenced right before, that a bed is still considered a kli so long as you have a board with 2 legs that are still attached to it. But that seems like a very odd place to draw the line. I don't know, why not 3 legs? Why not 2 boards? So the Gemara explains, L'may chazia, l'mismechinhu aguda u'm'lemesa v'layu mishta ashli. So basically, if you can envision it, or I might have I don't know, my assistant Gemara is not here, I don't have a picture of it, but basically you can prop it against the wall. You already have 2 legs. The wall supports it, and then you put some ropes over it, and what do you know? You have like a little spring over there, and now you have yourself a couch against the wall. So because the board and 2 legs are still usable if you prop it against the wall, so therefore it still has a Torah's kli, it has the status of a kli, and is thus still susceptible to tuma, which also, for our purposes, means put on the schach. It would not be usable for schach. Is that a question or? Okay. All right. Next section of the Gemara. Gufa, on this very point that we just learned. Amar Avali Bartav Yumi Sicha Bivloi Kalim. Psula. So we mentioned earlier at the beginning of this that kalim, that referring to clothing over here, that worn out clothing is possible. You can't now the worn out clothing we're talking about here has to be made from some kind of material that actually grew from the ground. If it's made out of wool, it's automatically possible because that grew from an animal. And we established an earlier Gemara, even though animals might have some association with the ground, they're not considered to grow from the ground. So we're talking about cotton or linen, things that grew from the ground. So they're not inherently possible, but when they wear out, and there's less of them left, so my bloy kalim, what are bloy kalim? Amar Abai, matulanios she'im behem shalosh al shalosh. So we're talking about these very worn out like patches that basically don't even have 3x3 finger span anymore. So they're considerably small. They are so unusable that the wealthy people won't use them. The poor people won't use them. Nobody has any use for them. And Tanya Kavase Dravami Bartavyumi Machatzeh Shel Shifav Shel Gemi Shirei Aval Pisha Niftachu Mikshirei A Misach Mehen. So we have a brisa that supports this very point. If you have if you have these mats that are made out of different kinds of reeds, so even if there are like shirayim, right? You ever hear like the Hasidim, they say, I went to the Rebbe to get shirayim, which I remember that's a very disappointing moment for me. To the one and only Tish I ever went to when I was a kid, and I think for the rest of my life, I remember like I was starving the whole time, and then they finally passed around some food, and then it was like little slithers of carrots that the Rebbe blessed or touched or sneezed on. I'm not quite sure, and so that they call him shirayim. You get his leftovers. Same word over here, I think. So if whatever is left over of them, even though they are less than the shear, they cannot be used for schach because the Rabbanan were gozer, since at their inception, when they were initially made, they were able to be makabel tuma, even though their dimensions have significantly diminished over time, to the extent that if they were initially made that way, they wouldn't be makabel tuma. Since they were initially makabel tuma, we treat them as always being makabel tuma and thus cannot be used for schach. And then finally, just again on that point about the mats, this, by the way, this point is very relevant for schach. If you get your schach at Home Depot, so if you're like, what's the big deal? Why do I need to pay $50 million to get it from the guy in Muncie? So one of the potential issues of getting schach from Home Depot is, what were those bamboo mats originally made for? See, I tell you this at the end of the sukkahs, right? What were these bamboo mats originally made for? So if they were made for sitting on, that's an issue. They'll be makabel tuma. But if they were made to serve as schach initially as a cover or maybe a fence in the ground, that would not be makabel tuma. So the issue is that, actually we have an advantage. Nowadays you go to the store and many times they'll tell you this is bamboo fencing. So it's made for fencing. So I know it's not makabel tuma. Or this is a bamboo yoga mat. It says bamboo yoga mat. You know it's meant for sitting. But back then, they didn't necessarily have those listings that it was clear to the consumer what they were getting. So we have general rules of thumb. Big ones we assume are meant to serve as schach. Smaller ones we assume are yoga mats or whatever mats. So Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Rabbi Eliezer, however, assumes even the big ones are just basically huge yoga mats that they roll out across the floor. The principle of the matter is that it's important what the schach was originally made for. It was originally made for a function that would render it susceptible to tumah. You cannot turn around and then use it for schach. End of the Gemara tonight. We'll do a Tosos in just a moment, but let me pause if we have any questions. By the way, this whole machatzelas, this whole mat thing is going to come up The actual mission, I think, is on Daf Chaf, if I'm not mistaken. Someone can check the reference and tell me if I'm correct, but it should be coming up relatively soon. In case this topic fascinates you, we will delve more into it in the coming weeks, God willing. All right. So if you take a look at Tosfos, it's the third to last one. And that's the Tosfos. You're welcome to follow along inside if you'd like to, or it's a relatively short one. Or you could just digest it as good old Torah Sheval Pad, the oral Torah. So what is this Tosfos going on? This Tosfos is dealing with the line in the Gemara. We saw just toward the end. We said that when you have a patch that is less than 3 by 3, so it's so small that it's not usable for anybody. So Tosfos is preempting a question. Now you might say, well, I don't know, let's say you take Yaakov Avinu's philosophy. What did Yaakov Avinu do? He went back for the Pachim Kitanim. He went back for the small jars. So let's say, you have a Yaakov Avinu philosophy. And you say, well, I don't care how small it is. There's a use for everything. So now we're going to bring in a concept that we learned closer to the beginning of the Masechta, Batla Daito. Even though you might consider it to be useful, since in general in the world, this is not considered to be chashuv enough, it doesn't have any inherent significance to it, Batla Dato Eitzakol Adam, your opinion is nullified vis-a-vis how the world relates to this, and therefore it's categorically not able to be Makabel Tuma. Now, the Rabbana came along and said, since it could originally be Makabel Tuma, we treat it that way anyway, but let's say it was originally made like this, it would not be Makabel Tuma, even if I, Moshe Kurtz, consider this to be very significant. Now, you might think to ask, Tosfos says, Fadamasha b'zvachin, Perik Dam Chatas, the Matlis Pechusa Mishosh Ashosh, Mahanya Be Machshava. So there is a Gemara in Zvachim. I didn't get a chance to look up the Gemara, but my understanding is that it basically contradicts what it says over here. That when you have a patch that is less than 3 by 3, even if I just use my psychic mental powers alone to consider it to have significance, that would be sufficient to make it susceptible to Tuma. Why I would want to do that, I don't know. But Machshava, thought, would be enough. So I don't get it. Is my individual thought enough to render it significant enough that thereby it's Makabel Tuma, or is it not? So Tosfos' distinction is as follows. So lo dummy, the hasa machshavaso ni karis mitoch maisav capricious parachav ches dekalim. Because there, your machshava, your thought, is discernible from your deed that you're performing. What do we mean by that? I saw some different interpretations. So in Hilchos Shabbos, let's take an example that I think is pretty digestible. One of my favorites to go to and explain Hilchos Muksa is again, I hope this doesn't happen too often in Israel, but we always hear, hopefully apocryphally, that there are people who keep special rocks at their homes, so if a car comes by on Shabbos in the Haredi neighborhood, they could throw rocks at it. Okay, so I hope that doesn't actually happen, but that's like, that's like a thing like you hear about. So the question always was, wait a minute, aren't the rocks muksa machmas gufa? Except for, forget about the damage you're causing to the car. But aren't the rocks considered muksa? Like that's like exhibit A muksa is a rock on the ground. So what's the pshat? They put it aside before Shabbos, so that way it was designated to have a function, so it's not muksa. So there's a question in muksa. Okay, I'll give you a more reasonable example that we would encounter. What if you want to use a stone as a door stopper, right? So people are coming to Shir, Mincha Shabbos afternoon, the back door for the code is not working again, and we can't use the front code because it's electronic. And so let's say we prop the door open with a stone. So if we set the stone aside before Shabbos, that's good. But the question is as follows. Is it enough for me to say, I use my psychic energy and say, this stone over here, I'm thinking on Friday afternoon, I'm going to use that for Shabbos. Or do I have to actually do a mice and pick it up and put it somewhere? And then from my deed, it's reflective of what my intention was. Is it enough for me just to think, or do I have to do a deed? So what Tosfos is saying is, is that if you do some kind of action, a little unclear what the action is, you have to actually adjust something on the patch, or if it's enough if you place it somewhere, it's unclear. But if you do an action that is reflective of what you were thinking, that is a strong enough of a machshava. That's a strong enough of a thought that it would actually render it significant and make it susceptible to tumah. So, okay, we touched on a lot of things. We did sukkah, nida, Tumah, and now some Hilchos Shabbos. So Baruch Hashem, we touched on numerous areas of halacha, all within a short span of Gemara. And I'm afraid to go any further because lest we don't have that much material for next time. So I think we'll end it over here. And otherwise, that's all, folks. I know a number of you emailed me that you're away, and some of you actually who are here already signed up. So I thank you for that as well. I'm gonna, God willing, be doing the book presentation event thing on Wednesday night. So if you're available to join me, it'd be wonderful. And if not, it should be less about my ego, more about you getting the book. So even if you're not able to make it, let me know, and I'm happy to get you a copy. Rather than order it online for X price, I could give it to you for something much more reasonable, I would hope. So, okay, wishing you all and I got your email, Toby. Thank you. And I saw a number of you signed up, so I thank you. I don't want to start calling out names, getting anything wrong, but
So please put one aside for me to buy.
I have in my office. If anyone needs, I have in my office.
What?
So,
Okay, good.
So next time you're in the shul, let me know and I'll get you one. Okay, very good. All right, take care, everyone. Have a wonderful Shabbos, Shmini Atzeres, and Simchas Torah. And well, God willing, I sent out an email with all the updates. So I don't just check your emails. I wrote out all the sheer updates. It should all be there. I don't need to do chazar on all of it, right? Okay. Take care, everyone. Good night.
Same to you and everyone.
Amen. Thank you.